I know that not everybody carries cash anymore. We're kind of in a cashless society. But if you have any cash on you, pull out a bill, if you would. Just kind of look, see if you have a bill or a coin. Don't worry. I know everybody's always afraid to get money out in church. They think we're going to take it. We're not going to take it. Just see if you've got like a coin or a bill and grab it, get it into your hand. And I want you to look at it with me for just a moment this morning. I have $1. Anything you have would be great to look at. Every bill has something printed on the front side and something printed on the back side. If you're holding a bill and it doesn't have something on one of the sides, it's a counterfeit, and it's not a very good counterfeit because every bill has a front side and a back side. The book of Revelation is a lot like this. Revelation has a definite positive side, and it has a negative side as well. Each side is equally true. Now, do you remember way back to Revelation chapter 5 and verse 1? We were introduced to the scroll. And the scroll that had the 7 seals gets opened up and it unfolds this vision, which gives us the rest of the book of Revelation. And do you remember what was said about the scroll? It was written on the front side and on the back side. Interesting, because most of the time, papyrus in their day, the paper they wrote on, was not written on the front side and the back side. It was only written on one side. If you take the bill you have and you roll it up, and you would imagine that if you had writing you were trying to protect on the inside, you wouldn't write on the outside because it could easily get dropped in the dirt or stained, and then it was hard to see the writing. So they would only write on one side, and they would unroll it so that they could see the writing on the inside. But the book of Revelation has both sides as it unfolds in parallels. It certainly reveals Jesus, and that's what we're seeing in this series. It reveals God and his qualities and his work, but it also reveals for us Satan and his characteristics and his evil deeds. It tells us of the Lamb and his sacrifice for sin and his enduring faithfulness and his eventual return and campaign over evil. But on the other side, it shows us the beast and the false prophet and how they are working together with Satan in this unholy trinity to go against God. And it explains what that looks like. Revelation reveals their deceit, their sinister actions, their eventual demise. On the one side, it pictures a glorious woman who is connected to God. And we will see in Revelation chapter 21, whenever God comes back and is bringing the church into the fold, it's pictured as a marriage, and there's beauty and there's purity, and everybody's in white to represent the beauty and the purity of the moment. And yet, on the backside of the bill is a sensuous and provocative prostitute. The community of Christ is characterized by love and truth and endurance, and it's paralleled by a harlot who's characterized by murder and fornication and falsehood. And as we see this unfold in Revelation chapter 17, we will see the beauty of those who are connected to Jesus and the deceit of those who are connected to Satan. Now, I have to tell you, it's much more fun for me to preach on the positive side. As a pastor, I love talking about grace. I love talking about how God gives grace freely to people. I think as Christians, one of our biggest struggles is understanding grace, because we're always like, what's the catch? What's the catch? What do I have to do to add to what Jesus did? And the Bible clearly teaches we do nothing to add to what Jesus has done for us. And so the front side, the positive side, is where we like to spend our time. And yet we will be forced today to look at the other side of the scroll. It's on both sides to see what is happening and what will happen. You know, sometimes the purity police in all of us comes out a little bit. If you ask someone, hey, why do you believe in Jesus? Why do you go to church? And they say, because I don't want to go to hell. We are like, well, that seems like kind of not the best answer you could give. But it's a legitimate answer. There is a truth on the backside that each of us should want to avoid and be as far away from as we can. The desire to reach out to others is going to be cultivated as we continue to work our way through the book of Revelation. In chapters 15 and 16, we have the stage set for the final judgment, and we'll see it continuing to unfold in chapter 17. So let's jump into chapter 17. But first, we're going to go ahead and pass the plates and take the money you have out. I'm just kidding. Hang on to that. I'm actually going to come back to it in a minute. So if you want, just kind of hang on to that for just a moment, and we will come back to that at the very end of the message as well. So chapter 17, we're preaching straight through the book of Revelation. If you're visiting for the first time, we're glad you're here. We have some journals in the back. And I tell you what, let's go ahead and turn the lights on so everybody can see and follow along with the reading. We believe the Word of God has the power to change lives, and so we go straight through books of the Bible, and in this particular series, we're working our way through the book of Revelation. It's the last book of the Bible. It's challenging to understand, and yet, as we'll see today, it has something very important to say to our lives. So here we go, starting in verse 1 of chapter 17. Then one of the seven angels who had the seven bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed sexual immorality, and with the wine of whose sexual immorality the dwellers on the earth have become drunk." And he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was full of blasphemous names, and it had 7 heads and 10 horns, the beast. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet and adorned with gold and jewels and pearls, holding in her hand a golden cup full of abominations and the impurities of her sexual immorality. And on her forehead was written a name of mystery, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and of the earth's abominations. And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints, the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I marveled greatly. Here, John introduces us to the great prostitute, and she's certainly a sight to behold. Almost instantly, our mind starts to draw a picture. What does she look like? How is it that she is seated on many waters? What's going on with the beast? What do they look like? The beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns. Many have speculated. There's a really old woodcut by a German artist that gives us an idea. We're going to put the picture up there on the screen for you, and you should be able to see it as home as well. This is a possible depiction of what this scene looks like, and it's something to marvel at, as John did. For us to understand this scene, we have to understand satire. Satire runs through the entire portrayal of the prostitute. We think of satire most often in terms of political cartoons. So for those of you who are over the age of 40, you've seen a newspaper, and used to, there was a section of the newspaper that would often have political satire in it, especially during an election year. If you're younger, think of memes. A lot of memes today are nothing more than this generation's version of political satire. They are modern illustrations that pull out a point, and often they illustrate the point by exaggerating the person's traits. So take, for example, when George Bush famously said, "Read my lips, there will be no new taxes." And then what happened? Of course, there were new taxes, right? Because there always are. And so then he was drawn in political satire as a guy with great big lips. In the same way, political groups are represented by satirical images. So the U.S. is often portrayed as Uncle Sam. Uncle Sam has on the long striped coat and striped pants and a top hat with stars and a goatee. An elephant represents the Republicans. A donkey represents the Democrats. In satire, there is a simple picture that is identified that gives us the picture of something else. Revelation commentator Craig Croster says satire seeks to show us something that we might not otherwise see, and its humorous elements contribute to the persuasive power. So if people can be persuaded to think what appears as impressive is actually ridiculous, and what seems glamorous is actually garish, and what appears desirable is in fact ludicrous, they will be more ready to resist it. John's vision works in this way. It shows a woman who's in a drunken stupor. Instead of sitting on a steed, which we would expect, she is seated upon an ugly beast. And in her hand, she has a cup that we would expect a golden cup to be filled with the finest of wines. And yet her cup is filled with the most awful of sewage. To identify her as any good political cartoonist would do, John writes the name on her forehead. She is Babylon the Great, and we'll talk about who she is in a second, but let's talk first about what it is that she is doing. The prostitute allures and tempts and seduces and draws people away from God. Likening back to the Babylon of old, the prostitute uses industry and art and culture and any other means necessary to draw people away from their relationship with God. She capitalizes on the lust of the flesh. She tempts with the eyes so that we are drawn to her. And in this way, Babylon is viewed as something that's past and something that's present and something that's future. She is associated with world empires that have risen and fallen. There is always an allure of power that draws the most faithful followers to come and stare. As for the prostitute's representation in John's day, we'll see in verse 9 that she is associated with the 7 hills. That was very much a call out to Rome. Rome was the city built on 7 hills. Cincinnati, right? Of course, if you go downtown Cincinnati, there's a fountain, and the fountain has the Cincinnatus there because we're the second Rome. We are a city built on the 7 hills to represent Rome. And so very much there is a call out here to the cultural center of the world, the city on the 7 hills. And here John likens her to an alluring prostitute. Essentially, he is saying the most powerful nation in the world is a whore. Is it any wonder, whenever we pick up the book of Revelation, that John is on an island because he has been banished? This would not have been a popular message to be heard. John is being used by God to be the fly in the ointment. The imperial city with all of her pleasures is attracting the kings to come. Life and art and industry and sport and commerce are luring people away from God. Vanity and luxury and pleasure are the king. In a short time, the Roman Empire will get to the point where they put people into stadiums and watch them tore apart by lions. The prostitute is drunk on blood, and only the names have changed. Seduction always opposes the bride. Babylon's fall is taking place in small ways and big ways throughout the course of human history. It will culminate on the last day of judgment when the final bowl is poured out. But by comparing the prostitute to Rome, John is letting us know the demise has already begun. But for now, the prostitute is luring people away to drink unclean things. What are those unclean things that are drunk? Well, it's anything that takes us away from God. That can be pornographic videos or literature. It can be sports when they become completely absorbing. It can be luxuries. It can be world power. It can be fame. We get to make our own list, and some things on the list, they are bad in and of themselves, but other things like the list, like art, are simply neutral depending upon how they're used, and the empires of the world are seductive. I was thinking about this on Sunday night. I watched the Grammys, and at one point Sam Smith was dressed like a sexualized demon woman and sang a song about unholy sexual relationships, while Kim Petras, the first transgender Grammy winner, shook her crotch at the camera inside of a cage. And what struck me was less the art, if we want to call it that, I think it's a stretch, and more the look on the faces. You could tell that the camera operators of the Grammys were working overtime to find anyone who looked entertained and not mortified by what was going on. But no one says anything about it because there is an alluring sexuality about the scene, and its seduction draws us in. The spirit of the beast teaches our young men and women that sexualization is actually the success. In a time when we are supposed to be freeing people from the bonds of a patriarchal society, we put the first transgender Grammy winner inside of a cage and take crotch shots. How is that freedom? It's not. And it doesn't make sense. And guess what? It will never make sense because the effects of Babylon have an aesthetic influence on every single one of us. What's an anesthetic? Well, it's a substance that we give to produce an insensitivity to pain. The intoxicating efforts of Babylon's wine removes the destructive influence of the evil. The antiseptic effects of evil bind people so that we start to lose our sensitivity and our understanding of what's going on. Evil numbs us with a fear of judgment, and it entices us to clap at what is unholy. And I want to pause for a moment to ask you to consider the ungodly influence that might be binding you from a relationship with God and what Christ has done. What aspects of our culture have numbed you from the reality of God's coming judgment? What is in your cup? What is it that is luring you away from faithfulness to God? Is it pornographic videos? Is it luxuries? Is it fame? Is it power? Is it sports, which are completely absorbing? There's so much in our culture that entices us to walk away from faithfulness to God. And it's always super alluring. I'm going to give you a personal example, and I always caution these because everybody has to figure out your own path in life. I'm just going to share something that my wife and I have chosen. If you don't choose the same thing, that's okay. But one example of where this came to light for us is many of you know that we don't allow our boys to start playing football until they get into junior high. Why? Because elementary football games are on a Sunday morning, and missing church is not an option for our family. This is based on statistics for me. I'm a stats guy. Here's the statistics. 0.023% of kids have a chance of playing professional sports. 0.023% have a chance of playing professional sports. My faith leads me to believe that it's 100% guarantee that every one of my kids will stand before God someday. And I want to parent towards the guarantee, not towards the 0.023%. And that causes me to make choices. And it sucks. I know my sons will not have the same opportunities because they did not start playing at the age of 8. But at some point, as a family, we have to draw lines and say, listen, culture may be leading in a whole different direction where worship of God is an option. But for my family, that's not an option. Now, I think every one of us has to make those tough choices. Now, we better move on before I start preaching. So, we greet the prostitute and we meet the prostitute in verse 6. And she causes us to marvel. How much does our culture cause us to marvel? How much are we lured away by the sexual seduction of what is going on around us? An angel snaps John out of his marveling and snaps us out of our marveling. Let's pick up in verse 7. But an angel said to me, "Why do you marvel? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast with the 7 heads and the 10 horns that carry her." So here we go. The angel says, I'm going to tell you what's going on here in this scene. The beast that you saw was and is not and is about to rise from the bottomless pit and go to destruction. And the dwellers on earth whose names have not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world will marvel to see the beast, because it was and is not and is to come. This call for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. They are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen. One is, the other has not yet come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beast that was and is not and is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7th, and it goes to destruction. And the 10 horns that you saw are the 10 kings who have not yet received royal power, but they are to receive authority as kings for 1 hour. Together with the beast, these are of one mind, and they hand over the power and the authority to the beast. They will make war on the Lamb, and the Lamb will conquer them, for he is the Lord of lords and the King of kings, and those who with him are called and chosen and faithful. And the angel said to me, the waters that you saw where the prostitute is seated are peoples and multitudes and nations and languages. And the 10 horns that you saw, they are the beast. They and the beast will hate the prostitute and will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her in fire. For God has put it into their hearts to carry out this purpose by being of one mind and handing over the royal power to the beast until the words of God are fulfilled. And the woman that you saw is the great city that has dominion over the kings of the earth. Okay, the angel just explained it to us so you all can go home. This is where the book of Revelation gets challenging, right? Because the angel steps in and says, well, let me explain what you just saw. And then we're all thinking, well, we need an explanation of the explanation. And I'm going to try to explain it to you today. And you may leave here saying, man, I need an explanation of the explanation of the explanation. And that's just the way this goes. Let me give you a helpful quote. Eugene Boring, who is a Revelation commentator, says, John is writing a pastoral letter to address the immediate problems of his hearers, not a puzzle for later generations. I think it's real important to keep in mind. We saw early on the book of Revelation is written to 7 churches that were actual real churches with breathing, eating people in Asia Minor, what we would call modern day Turkey. That is who this letter is written to. And so it's not a puzzle to figure out. It is a pastoral letter that has a message for the readers then and a message for us now. John is writing to 7 churches, and he fears that they will miss the luring power of the reigning empire. And John wants to make sure that they see that Rome, as great as it is, can become a threat to their relationship with God. As for what's going on in this passage, there are 8 prominent views that are accepted by scholars, and under those 8, there are 6 different subsets that are accepted by scholars. So if you study the book of Revelation and you look up this particular passage, you will find that pretty much everybody says it can be any one of these. So if we're going to get done before the Super Bowl starts, go ahead and number your journal 1 through 48, and we're going to get started here. I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that to you, but I will just pause here as a side note. Anybody that says to you, man, the book of Revelation is really easy to understand, they've never actually studied the book of Revelation. There is so much in this book that is debated by people that have spent their entire lives studying this thing. For this particular passage, there are 48 views that are considered legitimate options of how to understand this passage. I want to stay really high level. Tons of ink has been poured out to explain this passage because of all the confusion. What we can say with certainty is that God is showing us through this vision the rise and fall of power. The kings seem to represent the kingdoms, and John is describing that there are some that have come and there are some that will come. He may be speaking back to old Babylon and Assyria and New Babylon and Persia and Greece. He may be speaking of certain emperors of Rome. There are many commentators who will say, no, he's talking about this emperor and this one and this one. Many say, no, he's looking to the future and this is yet to come. However you read it and however you take it, you're supposed to notice the 8th. The 8th is different than the other 7, and yet he is tied to the other 7 as well. It's part of the beast that comes from the sea, and his work is for a time, but notice it is for a short time versus verse 11, he will be destroyed. And in the meantime, he's very powerful. So what does John do? He wonders in confusion and fear, how can the church stand against the assault of this beast who is accepted? How can the church stand when her power, its power, his power is so intoxicating? The beast seems all powerful. Elsewhere in Revelation, John is introducing us to the 7 churches in Asia. They're meant to represent all of the churches. In the same way, the 7 seals are broken, the 7 trumpets are sounded, the 7 bowls are emptied. Every time we see 7, it is representing to us a completion. And so this beast, the 8th that is one of the 7, is the complete power that is opposed to God. Picturing it this way may be a likening to the myth that Nero would return one day. We don't know. But what we do know is this, that evil is self-destructive. Evil self-destructs. That's certainly the case here. Did you notice we were reading through it that the beast and his allies began by waging war on the lamb, but in the end, verse 16, they destroyed the prostitute. Here's what it says, verse 16 repeated, and the 10 horns that you saw, they and the beast will hate the prostitute. They will make her desolate and naked and devour her flesh and burn her up with fire. After carrying the great prostitute for a time, they overthrow her. The purple and scarlet gown that she wears, the jewels which gave her pride, they are stripped away. She has consumed the blood of the saints, and now she is consumed by the beast, and her remains are set on fire. In chapter 16, Babylon is shattered by one of God's angels. Here, God allows the destructive force to come from within. The beast comes from the bottomless pit where destruction reigns, and destruction is what the beast brings with it when it comes. Even destruction to its allies. The sobering message of this vision is that God's judgment is carried out when he allows those who wreak havoc to become the victims of their own practices. Evil self-destructs. Given enough time, evil always turns on itself. The seduction of the world, its pleasures, its cultures, luxury, it always turns inward on itself, but it's not too late. We can't help but think in this story of Judas who betrayed Jesus for 30 pieces of silver. He went and he drank of the golden cup, and the 30 pieces of silver were so enticing, he was willing to trade his relationship with his Lord for that financial gain. But when it happened, he realized the price was too steep, and so he tossed the money back into the temple and he took his own life. The pleasures of sin always disappoint in the end. And Revelation 17, verses 16 to 17 is a lesson for yesterday. It's a lesson for today, and it's a lesson for tomorrow. It reveals the course of our world where people harden themselves to God. Hardened people continue in sin until it destroys them. That's the way evil always works. It starts enticingly, and yet it ends with destruction. Evil inevitably turns upon evil and destroys itself. We see the self-destructive power of evil at work in lives every single day. People who give in to illicit sex, hatred, drugs, alcohol, or violence often destroy themselves with those same sinful behaviors. Paul teaches this very thing in Romans chapter 1. He shows us that God carries out his judgment on the world by letting sin destroy itself. He says this, God will give them over to their sinful desires. I'm going to put the words of Romans 1 on the screen. I just want to read these, and I want you to listen to them, and I want you to picture our world and what's happening in our world as I read these words. So Romans chapter 1, there we go. But God's angry displeasure erupts as acts of human mistrust and wrongdoing and lying accumulate. As people try to put a shroud over truth. So God said, in effect, if that's what you want, that's what you get. And it wasn't long before they were living in a pig pen smeared with filth, filthy inside and out. And all this because they traded the true God for a fake God and worshiped the God they had made instead of the God who had made them, the God we bless, the God who blesses us. Oh, yes, worse followed. Refusing to know God, they soon didn't know how to be human either. Women didn't know how to be women. Men didn't know how to be men. Sexually confused, they abused and defiled one another, women with women, men with men, all lust and no love. And they paid for it. Oh, how they paid for it. Emptied of God and love, godless and loveless wretches. Since they didn't bother to acknowledge God, God quit bothering to acknowledge them and let them run loose. And then all hell broke loose. Rampant evil, grabbing and grasping, vicious backstabbing. They made life hell on earth in their envy and their wanton living and their bickering and their cheating. Look at them, mean-spirited, venomous, fork-tongued God bashers, bullies, swaggers, insufferable windbags. They keep inventing new ways of wrecking lives. They ditch their parents when they get in the way, stupid, slimy, cruel, cold-blooded. And it's not as if they don't know better. They know perfectly well they're spitting in God's face, and they don't care. What's even worse is that they hand out prizes to those who do the worst things the best. Was this passage written 2,000 years ago, or was this passage written yesterday? As it is with people, it is with empires. One of the ways God exercises his judgment is by letting us get what it is we say we want. He gives us over to ourselves. This is God's punishment of the great prostitute. How is it that we escape? We escape through repentance. We escape through righteousness. We escape to holding on to God even when we're being lured away. I know this message is heavy. I know it's a bit in your face. But I want you to see that Satan uses various temptations to lure us away from God because he knows evil destroys its own. That's kind of the point that I hope you'll walk away with today. That Satan uses various temptations to lure us away from God because he knows that evil will destroy its own. Satan doesn't have to destroy us. He just lets us do it ourselves. We do a fine job of wrecking our own lives, but there's a better way. Remember the bill from earlier. Revelation has a definite positive side, and Revelation has a definite negative side as well. The truth is, there are cultural realities that are alluring and tempting and seducing us away from God. The effects of Babylon are like an anesthetic. They dull our sensitivity to evil. And this is a real problem because evil in the end is always self-destructive. And I don't want that. I don't want my life to be ruined. I don't want your life to be ruined by the self-destructive patterns of evil, but it is seductive. Culture and power and fame and glory cause each of us to pause and to marvel at various points in time. But like John, we have the opportunity to be snapped awake by the voice of the angel. We have the potential to be shaken from our marveling so that we'll wake up to the truth and we will see the self-destructive nature of what our world promises is good, what allures us and instead procures our hearts, what is seductive that ends up being destructive, what is tempting in the end and ends up ripping our lives apart. Which brings me to the question and the action step. Here they are. The question I'd like you to ask today in reflection is simply, in what ways am I being lured away from God? Like, how am I being lured away from God? And I think that it's different for everybody. Revelation 17 has multiple ways of application, but God is giving us a warning. There is a cultural presence out there that is luring you away from God. In what ways are you being lured away from God? And that comes to the action step. Share it with somebody. You know, one of the best things we can do as Christians is be connected, whether that's in a small group or a core group or people that we're getting together with on a regular basis and talking about what God is doing in our lives. And it's with these people that we need to be able to say openly and freely, man, I can see that I'm being lured away from God in this way, and I need you to help me because I don't want that to be the case. Even John, this passage is, as you read it, it's one of those people like they kind of struggle with, because you've got John who's getting this vision of revelation that's given to us, and we put John up on a pedestal, but when he stops and he marvels at the image, the Greek word that's used there gives the impression that he is being drawn in to what is happening, that he is being sucked into what is going on. If even John can be affected by this, then we have to wonder how much we can be affected by it as well. The lure is very, very strong. And it's on us to be able to cling to God, to see what lures us away, and to turn to him. So let's pray, and then we're going to pray. We're going to prepare for communion. God, thank you for giving us both the front and the back of the scroll in Revelation. Help us to see the temptations in life as they actually are. Give us the wisdom that we need so that we're not lured away from you by the cultural voice that is so loud. Help us to be honest about the evil in life we face and to acknowledge its self-destructive power. Use the voice of the angel to shake us out of our complacent stares so that we can be real with what it is that has the potential to destroy our lives. Thank you for giving us a different path to take by following Jesus. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Each week, we eat and we drink together to celebrate that Jesus paid the price for us, that he's coming back to redeem us and take us to be with him. So if you're taking steps to follow the Lamb, you're welcome to join us. Let's eat and thank God for showing us the truth about the one who seduces. Remember the satire. The whole picture is meant for you to see, man, that thing that looks so good, in the end, it's actually destructive. And yet, following Jesus in the book of Revelation doesn't look all that good. When he writes to the churches, he tells them you're about to experience a bunch of persecution. And yet, in the end, that results in being with God. And so drink and remember that Jesus will make good on his promise to return and to redeem the faithful. If you're able, I invite you to stand with your church family. We're going to sing a worship song that I really appreciate. The words of the song say, I am who you say I am. It's a truth that we need to reiterate because our culture tells us all sort of lies about who we are. But if we're following Jesus, we are a son or a daughter of God. So let's celebrate God's love for us, and let's make a commitment to God and to ourselves not to be lured away from loving him.